They say karma comes slow, but when it hits, it demolishes. This is the story of how my ex-best friend's girlfriend who used, manipulated, and leeched off everyone around her finally hit rock bottom. She mooched off me, wrecked our friend group, and had the audacity to think she'd never face consequences. But life caught up with her. Now she's jobless, homeless, and completely alone. And I've got front row seats to the downfall. Trust me, you're gonna want to hear every bit of this. We used to think we had the perfect friend group. There were 5 of us, and for a while it really felt like we were a little family. There was me, always down to help out and drive everyone around. There was my best friend at the time, let us call him Jake, who was kind of the glue that kept the group together. There was the friend I still hang out with, call her Mia, who was the laid-back one, funny and chill. And then there was the 2 wild cards, Jake's girlfriend, who I'll call Sarah, and this other girl, Emma, who honestly never had her own opinion, just latched onto whatever drama was happening. It started out pretty normal. We'd hang out late, go on random road trips, binge crappy shows in someone's living room, just normal young adult stuff. But then Sarah came into the picture, and it was like she instantly knew how to work the dynamic in her favor. At first, she was sweet, overly sweet, honestly. She'd compliment me out of nowhere, telling me I was like a sister. And she'd talk about how grateful she was to have a group of friends she could count on. The first few months, she slid right in and it felt like she completed us. But something about it was off. I couldn't quite place it back then, but looking back, I think my gut already knew. The thing is, Sarah never had her own money, or her own car, or really her own anything. But she was smooth, always spinning a sob story about how her mom was so hard on her, how she had no one else, how she was terrified of being alone. So of course we all rallied around her, picked up the slack and tried to make her feel like she belonged. Jake especially fell hard for her story. He was the type to want to save someone, to be their hero. And Sarah knew exactly how to play into that. Soon, it wasn't just the occasional ride or covering a meal, she expected it. She'd text me out of the blue asking for money to cover her lunch. She'd leave passive-aggressive comments if I was too busy to pick her up or drive her somewhere. Jake would brush it off as her being stressed. And Emma, who basically mirrored whatever Sarah said, would guilt-trip me into doing it. I started to feel more like her personal assistant than her friend. But every time I tried to set a boundary, she'd spin it. I thought you cared about me. Or, you're the only person I can depend on. Meanwhile, she started creating little cracks in the group. Tiny things at first, planting seeds of doubt about Mia, or making sly comments about how maybe I was just jealous of her relationship with Jake, looking back. It was so calculated, but in the moment it felt like maybe I was being paranoid. The crazy thing is she never did this when everyone was around. In the group, she kept up the sweet act, laughing at jokes, acting affectionate with Jake, always making sure to look like the perfect girlfriend. But one-on-one, she'd slip in her venom, pushing us away from each other piece by piece. The real shift came when Jake started pulling back from me and Mia. He stopped replying as fast in the group chat, started choosing her side in arguments even when she was clearly wrong. He'd say things like, "I think you're being too hard on Sarah," or "She just needs support right now." And we bought it for a while. We wanted to keep the peace. We wanted to believe that this girl who smiled so sweetly couldn't be the toxic mess we were starting to suspect she was. But it just kept getting worse. She started dropping these ultimatums on Jake, telling him he had to prove he was loyal to her by cutting people out, people like me and Mia. I tried talking to Jake privately, telling him I saw the way she treated him, how she was isolating him from the people who cared about him, but he didn't want to hear it. He was in too deep, convinced that Sarah just needed love and that everyone else was just being negative. So there we were, a group that once felt tight and unbreakable, suddenly full of tension and fake smiles. Sarah was controlling the narrative, and anyone who questioned her got iced out or guilted into submission. It felt like I was screaming into the void, watching someone I loved like a brother lose himself in someone who clearly didn't care about him, at least not in the way he deserved. And as Sarah's grip tightened, so did the feeling in my gut that this was all going to blow up. I just didn't know when or how brutal it would get when it finally did. It didn't take long for Sarah's real colors to start bleeding through, especially when it came to money and favors. At first, it was small things like asking me to spot her a coffee or chip in for gas when we were all hanging out. But soon she stopped even asking politely. It became this unspoken expectation that I would pay for her food, cover tickets when we went out, or let her borrow things without ever returning them. And I'm not talking about once or twice, this was constant. I remember this one time she texted me in the middle of the night because she needed a ride to see Jake. She didn't care that I had work early the next morning or that I was exhausted. I got out of bed and picked her up anyway, thinking that maybe she really needed help. But when she got in the car, she was scrolling on her phone, barely acknowledging me. No, thank you. No apology for the late hour. Just acting like it was normal for me to drop everything and serve her needs. And that became the pattern. She'd blow up my phone with requests, always with this subtle threat of guilt if I said no. She'd talk about how alone she felt, how no one cared about her, how hard her life was. And if I didn't jump to help, I was suddenly a bad friend. She'd get cold and distant, throwing passive-aggressive comments my way like, I just thought you of all people would understand what I'm going through, or I guess I was wrong about you. But while she was playing the victim with me, she was doing the exact same thing with Jake. She never worked a day in the relationship. Literally. She never had a job, never contributed financially, and constantly needed Jake to pay for everything: her rent, her food, her clothes, you name it. And the messed up part was, she somehow convinced him this was normal. That it was his duty to take care of her because her mom was so cruel, or because she had mental health struggles, or whatever excuse was convenient that week. Meanwhile, she used Jake's money to do whatever she wanted. She'd brag about ordering DoorDash all day while he was out working long shifts just to keep up with her spending. And when he'd come home exhausted, she'd guilt-trip him into taking her out or buying her gifts. If he didn't, she'd pick fights, calling him uncaring and cold. She always had a way of twisting reality, so she looked like the suffering heroine and everyone else looked like monsters for not bending over backwards to coddle her. I started noticing how manipulative she was in little ways too. She'd pick at Jake's insecurities and then rush in to comfort him, making herself look like the only person who truly understood him. It was disgusting, but he couldn't see it. I think he felt responsible for her, like if he just worked harder or showed her more love, she'd finally be okay. But she was never going to be okay because that would mean losing the power she had over him. With me, the emotional manipulation was different, but just as draining. Anytime I hinted that maybe she should pitch in for gas, or maybe she could find a part-time job, she'd start crying, saying I was attacking her and didn't believe in her potential. She'd go on about how stressed she was about school, about her horrible mom, about how she was fighting depression every day. And like an idiot, I'd drop the conversation thinking maybe I was being too harsh. Then there was Emma, the girl who latched onto Sarah like a shadow. She fed into Sarah's games, repeating her sob stories and helping her guilt-trip the rest of us. If I set a boundary, Emma would text me privately, saying stuff like, you know, Sarah's really struggling right now. I just wish you'd be more supportive. It felt like I was being tag-teamed by a manipulative duo that knew exactly how to play everyone's emotions to get what they wanted. The weird part was, Sarah never seemed stressed in the way most people under pressure do. She never worked, never hustled, never even really tried to fix anything. She'd lay in bed all day, scrolling TikTok, complaining about how the world was against her, while the rest of us scrambled to keep our lives together and keep her happy. Jake was sinking financially, but she didn't care. She'd say things like, I can't go get a job. It would destroy my mental health, while expecting him to pay for everything. And she'd lash out at him if he even hinted at needing help. Watching it happen was like watching someone slowly poison themselves, and no matter how many times I warned him, he wouldn't listen. I think the worst part was the entitlement. She truly believed the world owed her comfort and security, that it was our job to provide it. And if we didn't, we were monsters. I never met someone so shamelessly selfish in my life. But the cracks were showing, even if she didn't want to see them. Jake was getting tired. Mia was over it, and I was done playing along. It was only a matter of time before the whole charade blew up. And deep down, I was waiting for that day because, as much as I tried to help, some people just refuse to change until they lose everything. It wasn't like there was one giant explosion that ended everything in an instant. If anything, it was more like watching a house fall apart one rotting beam at a time. From the outside, Jake and Sarah still looked like a normal couple. He posted cute pictures of them sometimes. She still clung to him in public, acting affectionate and sweet. But underneath all that, it was like the foundation was crumbling. I could see it happening in the little things first. Jake used to be the most easygoing, patient guy I knew, but suddenly he was always on edge. He'd snap at people over small stuff, or go silent for hours when he used to be the type to respond instantly. He started pulling away from the friend group entirely, making excuses not to hang out. And when he did show up, he looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. I knew Sarah was behind it. She made him feel guilty for spending time with us, constantly texting him when he was out, demanding to know where he was, who he was with, and when he was coming home. And the second he'd step back into her orbit, she'd pull him into another whirlwind of drama about how she felt unloved, unsupported, or misunderstood. Meanwhile, she kept pushing him further away from everyone who actually cared about him. Whenever he tried to talk about hanging out with me or Mia, she'd find a way to start a fight, claiming we were toxic or out to ruin her happiness. She twisted normal moments into betrayal. If he laughed too hard at one of our jokes, she'd accuse him of flirting. If he vented about being tired or broke, she'd tell him it was our fault for distracting him or feeding negativity into his life. And he ate it up, too tired or too in love or maybe too scared of losing her to push back. But her grip wasn't as airtight as she thought. Jake started venting in tiny ways. It would slip out in random conversations, like when I ran into him alone at a gas station and asked how he was doing. He just shook his head and said, "I'm so tired, man," in this hollow voice that almost broke me. Or the time he texted me out of nowhere at 2 a.m., saying he felt like he was carrying the entire relationship on his back. But when I tried to respond, tried to give him an out, he ghosted again. That was the cycle, a flare of truth followed by silence, as Sarah dragged him back into the mess. Meanwhile, her manipulations were getting more obvious. She'd weaponize every single weakness he had, turning them into reasons he owed her something. If he said he was worried about money, she'd accuse him of not loving her enough to provide stability. If he wanted to focus on work or rest, she'd threaten to leave or make snide comments about how he clearly didn't care about her. And the worst part was when she started using threats of self-harm. She'd say things like, "I don't know if I even want to be here anymore," or "Every day I fight the urge to disappear." She knew exactly what she was doing, keeping him trapped in a cycle of fear and guilt so he wouldn't walk away. I remember the day he told me about that. He looked sick, like he wanted to cry but couldn't even find the energy. He said, "What if she actually does it? I can't be the reason someone dies." And as much as I hated her, even I didn't know what to say to that. That was the tightest cage she built around him, but cracks kept forming. She flunked out of college, the one thing she'd always used as her excuse for not working. Her mom cut her off completely, saying the only condition for her staying at home was staying in school. So she moved in with Jake full-time, turned his place into her private little nest where she laid around all day doing nothing. She'd wait for him to come home from work and expect him to cook, clean, take her out, and keep paying for everything, all while she barely got out of bed. And then came the ultimatum. I'll never forget this part.
He came to me and Mia shaking, looking like a ghost.
He said Sarah told him he had to prove he loved her by cutting off everyone who hated her, which apparently included me and Mia. She told him that if he didn't, she'd leave and might not survive it. That was the breaking point. He couldn't do it. He was tired, broke, and completely wrung out. He told her no, and she went ballistic screaming at him, crying, threatening to run away and never come back, calling him heartless and abusive. But something snapped in him that day. He didn't give in. He didn't beg her to stay. He just sat there, silent, while she destroyed the apartment, throwing things and sobbing about how he was just like everyone else. And eventually she wore herself out and collapsed on the floor, while he just walked into the bedroom and closed the door behind him. That was the first real power shift I saw him, finally choosing himself over her insanity. After that, it was like the illusion cracked for good. He stopped hiding how miserable he was. He told Mia and me that he knew he'd messed up by pushing us away, that he regretted letting Sarah isolate him, that he felt like he was waking up from a nightmare. But he was still trapped logistically. She was living in his place, had nowhere to go, and would still swing between sobbing breakdowns and manipulative guilt trips any time he mentioned her leaving. It wasn't clean or quick. There were weeks of back and forth, him trying to gently nudge her out, her threatening and crying and promising to change. But the momentum was shifting. He started spending more time with us, even if it was just sitting in silence to get out of the chaos at home. And Sarah started spiraling harder, ranting on social media, messaging random people about how horrible Jake was, trying to play victim to anyone who would listen. She was burning every bridge, not realizing the only reason she still had a roof over her head was Jake's shrinking patience. It was like watching someone set fire to their own life because they couldn't handle not being in control anymore. And no matter how hard she fought, no matter how many crocodile tears she shed, it wasn't working. The person she used to manipulate most, Jake, had finally stopped believing her act. And that was the beginning of the end. After the ultimatum fell flat and Sarah realized Jake wasn't going to cut off everyone to make her feel secure, the cracks in her carefully controlled reality split wide open. For the first time, her manipulations weren't working. Her usual weapon steers, guilt, threats, didn't make him jump anymore. You could almost feel the shift in the air, like the tension had snapped and all the power she once held was slipping through her fingers. Jake still let her stay at his place, mostly because he felt bad just kicking her out with nowhere to go. But he stopped catering to her. He stopped spending every dime he had to make her comfortable. He stopped apologizing when she cried. He started going to work without checking in with her every hour, and that, more than anything, set her off. She would lay in bed all day, sulking and pouting, texting him nonstop about how miserable she was. But when he got home, she'd act sweet for about 5 minutes before starting another fight. She'd accuse him of cheating, of not loving her, of being heartless. But unlike before, Jake wouldn't engage. He'd just shrug and walk away, telling her he didn't want to fight. And that drove her insane. Her whole personality was built around controlling the emotional temperature of the room. If she couldn't stir chaos, she didn't know who she was. I remember when Jake told me he'd confronted her about getting a job. He was barely scraping by, picking up extra shifts, selling stuff on Facebook Marketplace, just to keep the lights on. And meanwhile, she was ordering takeout every day, using his credit card, lounging around watching Netflix, refusing to do anything to help. So finally, he asked her calmly, gently, if she could maybe start looking for part-time work. She stared him dead in the face and said, "I'm too lazy to get a job. No guilt, no shame." Like it was the most normal thing in the world. Jake told me later he felt something inside him snap in that moment. He realized she wasn't struggling. She wasn't traumatized. She wasn't working on herself. She was just selfish. After that, he stopped hiding his frustration. He started venting openly to me and Mia, talking about how broke he was, how exhausting it was to come home from a 12-hour shift to find dirty dishes in the sink and Sarah in bed, still in her pajamas, scrolling TikTok. He told us how she'd try to drag him out to spend money he didn't have, and when he said no, she'd call him abusive, say he was neglecting her, say he never cared about her happiness. The crazy part is, she still believed she could manipulate him. Even when he was clearly done, when his voice was flat and tired and he barely looked at her, she kept trying. Her last trick was threatening to hurt herself. Every time he told her to leave or that he couldn't do this anymore, she'd burst into tears, wailing that she couldn't go back to her mom's, that she'd rather die than be alone, that he was the only reason she was even alive. But by then, the fear that tactic used to spark in him was gone. He didn't rush to comfort her.
He didn't beg her to stop. He'd just sit there, arms crossed, and say, "Then get help."
She hated that. You could see it in the way she'd stare at him, like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. Meanwhile, her bridges were burning everywhere else. Her mom wouldn't take her back unless she re-enrolled in college, which she refused to do. She tried leaning on Emma, the girl who'd always parroted her nonsense. But Emma had finally seen through her too, especially after Sarah started trash-talking her behind her back, calling her useless and pathetic. Mia wouldn't give her the time of day. And I sure as hell wasn't going to lift a finger to save her. She had nobody. And she knew it. You'd think that would motivate someone to change, to get their act together, to at least try to hold on to what little stability they had left. But not Sarah. She doubled down on the entitlement. She kept demanding that Jake pay for everything. She kept insisting he should be grateful she was even there, like she was some prize he'd be lost without. The delusion was unreal. It got so bad that Jake started sleeping at Mia's place just to get a break. He'd leave her there at his apartment and crash on the couch, ignoring the dozens of texts she'd send him every night. He told me he needed space to think, to plan his next move, to build up the mental strength to finally kick her out for good. Because as much as he wanted her gone, he was also terrified of the meltdown she'd have when he finally told her to leave. And she could feel it coming. You could see the panic building in her eyes, the way her voice would crack when she talked to Jake, the way she started swinging between love bombing and raging within the span of minutes. She was losing control, and she knew it. One day, she even tried to corner me at a coffee shop. She came up out of nowhere, acting like we were old friends, saying how worried she was about Jake, how much she loved him, how she was trying so hard to be better. She asked me to put in a good word for her, to convince him to be patient. I just looked her dead in the face and said, "You need to figure out your own life." And I walked away. The look on her face was priceless, like for the first time, she realized nobody was going to save her. The fall wasn't some big dramatic explosion. At least not yet. It was more like a slow-motion collapse, a series of tiny moments where her manipulations failed, where her tactics fell flat, where her once iron grip on Jake and the rest of us just dissolved into dust. And the more she spiraled, the more obvious it became to everyone that she was the problem. There was no more pretending, no more playing innocent, no more sympathy. The tide was turning, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Jake was done. We were done, and Sarah? She was standing on the edge of a cliff, kicking out the last stones holding her up, too stubborn, and entitled to admit the ground was about to give way beneath her. The day everything finally snapped wasn't some dramatic, movie-style scene with screaming and doors slamming, at least, not at first. It started quietly with Jake walking into Mia's apartment looking like a ghost. He'd been sleeping on her couch more and more, but that morning he just collapsed into the chair and said, "I can't do this anymore." He told us he'd gotten home the night before to find Sarah sitting in the dark, sobbing. She'd been texting him nonstop all day, messages ranging from pathetic pleas for him to come home, to threats that she'd kill herself if he didn't answer. He said when he walked in, she jumped up, grabbed his shirt, and started begging him not to leave her, promising she'd change, swearing this time it would be different, and he just ... Didn't feel anything. That was the breaking point. Where once her tears would have sent him scrambling to fix things, now there was nothing but emptiness and exhaustion. He told us he just stood there, staring at her, realizing he had no more sympathy left. She'd drained him dry. So when she saw he wasn't reacting, she flipped the switch, like she always did. She went from sobbing to screaming, accusing him of cheating, of wanting her dead, of abusing her. She threw a glass at the wall, shattered it into pieces, and when he didn't flinch, she started sobbing again, dropping to the floor, saying over and over, "I don't want to be alive if you don't love me." He told her to stop. That was it, just stop. And apparently that broke her more than anything else. She started screaming that he was a monster, that no one would ever love him, that he was going to be alone forever. But he walked into the bedroom, locked the door, and didn't come out until the morning. He said he lay there all night listening to her sobbing and wailing in the other room, banging on the door until she eventually passed out. The next morning he told her she needed to leave. She tried everything, begging, threatening, guilt-tripping, but this time it wasn't working. Jake told her she had a week to pack up and find somewhere else to go. That's when she pulled out the suicide card again, saying she didn't have anywhere to go, that she'd rather kill herself than leave, and this time he didn't fold. He told her he'd help her get in touch with her mom or find a shelter, but she couldn't stay with him anymore. That was the first time he truly put up a boundary and didn't back down. She screamed, cried, tore up his stuff, threw things at him, but he stayed calm. He said the entire time he just kept thinking about how much he'd sacrificed, how much he'd given, and how none of it had ever been enough. The days after that were brutal. Sarah wouldn't accept it. She kept trying to push him back into the pattern, but the pattern was broken. She'd wake him up at 3 in the morning sobbing. She'd follow him out the door when he tried to go to work, calling him heartless. She messaged me, Mia, even Emma, trying to get anyone to talk to Jake and convince him to change his mind. None of us replied. She posted vague rants on social media, painting herself as the victim, but no one was buying it anymore. Even Emma, who had always been her biggest cheerleader, texted Jake saying she couldn't deal with Sarah's drama anymore. It was like everyone collectively decided we were done letting this girl control our lives with her chaos. That last week was hell for Jake. He said he came home one night to find her sitting on the kitchen floor with a knife, sobbing and saying she couldn't live without him. But he called her bluff. He told her to call a crisis hotline or he'd call them for her. She dropped the knife immediately and started screaming that he was cruel and didn't care. That was the final nail in the coffin for him, realizing she was never actually going to hurt herself. She just wanted to keep him trapped. He spent that week sleeping at Mia's place while Sarah stayed in the apartment. He gave her the deadline, 1 week, and then he was changing the locks. She kept threatening to leave, then refusing, hoping he'd break. But he didn't, and when the week was up, he came back with Mia and me and told her it was time to go. She tried one last time, clutching his arm, crying, saying she couldn't survive without him. He pulled away. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't call her names, he just said, "I'm done, Sarah, you need to leave." We helped him pack her stuff into trash bags. She was cursing at us, crying, saying we'd ruin her life, and honestly, it felt like freedom. We put her bags by the door and locked it behind her. She stood outside screaming, kicking the door, until we threatened to call the cops. Then she left. Just like that. The hurricane she spun around herself for so long gone in an instant when she realized we weren't playing her game anymore. After that, she tried reaching out to Jake again, tried to get back in touch with me and Mia. We blocked her. Her mom wouldn't take her back. Emma ghosted her too. She was completely alone. She had nowhere to stay, no job, no one left to manipulate. And for the first time since she'd walked into our lives, there was peace. That was the real breaking point, not some dramatic screaming match, but the quiet collapse of every last bridge she'd built on lies and manipulation. And as much as part of me hated her, another part felt relieved, like finally we could all breathe again. Like maybe Jake could start putting his life back together without this parasite draining him dry. And Sarah? Well, she was on her own. And from the way she burned every chance she had, that was exactly where she deserved to be. After Sarah was gone, the apartment felt like a different place. Jake said the silence was the best gift he'd gotten in years. No more sobbing at 3 a.m., no more walking on eggshells, worried his every word would set her off. He finally had space to think, to breathe, to remember who he was before she sucked the life out of him. Mia and I helped him clean up the wreckage she left behind, literal trash bags full of her stuff, broken dishes, random junk she hoarded while living off him. We scrubbed the kitchen, threw out things that smelled like stale anxiety, and opened the windows to let in fresh air. It was like exorcising a demon from the place. And as we worked, Jake slowly started talking again. Really talking. He told us how he'd spent the past year feeling like he couldn't breathe, like any tiny act of self-preservation was a betrayal. He said he couldn't even watch a show he liked or buy himself a new shirt without Sarah accusing him of neglecting her needs. He'd been in constant survival mode, trying to anticipate her moods, trying to keep the peace, trying to stop the next meltdown. Now that she was gone, he felt like he was waking up from a nightmare. But even though the relief was there, the guilt still lingered. That's the thing about manipulators like Sarah, they plant poison deep in your mind. She had spent months convincing him he was responsible for her survival, that he was heartless if he ever put himself first, that he was worthless without her. So the first few weeks after she left were hard. He'd call us late at night just to say he felt empty, like something was wrong. But it wasn't really emptiness, it was just the absence of chaos. He was so used to the constant cycle of drama and panic that peace felt foreign, almost wrong. But slowly we reminded him this was what normal looked like. That love wasn't supposed to feel like drowning. That real friends didn't use guilt and fear to control you. And Sarah? She tried everything to worm her way back into our lives. She made new social media accounts after we blocked her. She sent long emails to Jake, alternating between calling him the love of her life and the devil incarnate. She even texted Mia, claiming she was homeless and had nowhere to go, begging for one last chance. But we held the line. Every time she tried, we shut her out. It was weird watching someone who once thought they had so much power end up completely alone. For so long she'd convinced us that she held the strings, that she was the center of everything, that the group would fall apart without her. But the truth was, she was the parasite eating away at our friendship, not the glue holding it together. And once we cut her out, everything else started healing. Jake and I started rebuilding our friendship from the ground up. There was awkwardness at first. Hurt feelings, old wounds, the lingering question of whether we could really trust each other again. But we took it slow. We met up for coffee, hung out with Mia, started sharing little bits of our lives again. And with every conversation I saw the old Jake returning, the goofy, kind, easygoing guy I'd missed so much. We talked a lot about forgiveness. About how people make mistakes, and how sometimes loving someone too hard blinds you to the damage they're causing. Jake apologized 1,000 times for pushing me away, for choosing Sarah over the people who actually cared about him. I told him I forgave him, but that I needed time. Because as satisfying as it was to watch Sarah crash and burn, the truth is her chaos had left scars on all of us. But time really does heal. A few months later, Jake got a new job that paid better. He started saving money instead of draining it into Sarah's endless demands. He started going to therapy, talking through the guilt and confusion she'd left him with. He looked healthier, happier, more like himself every day. And Mia and I were there every step of the way, reminding him he deserved this peace. As for Sarah, she faded into the background. Word got around that she was couch surfing, burning bridges with anyone who tried to help her. Last we heard, she was trying to guilt another guy into rescuing her, spinning the same sob story she'd used on Jake, but even that seemed to be falling apart. Because the truth about people like Sarah is, they can't keep up the act forever. Sooner or later, the mask slips, and everyone sees the rot underneath. Sometimes I think about what I'd say if she showed up at my door one day, crying and begging for help. Part of me wants to slam the door in her face. Another part wants to tell her exactly how much pain she caused, how she almost broke us. But the biggest part of me doesn't want to waste another second thinking about her. Because the best revenge isn't screaming at the person who hurt you, it's living well without them. And that's exactly what we're doing. Jake is healing. Our friend group is tighter than it's ever been. We don't talk about Sarah anymore, except as a cautionary tale, a reminder that no matter how charming someone seems, their actions tell you everything you need to know. And the next time someone like her comes around, we'll see the red flags a mile away. I guess in the end, it really did come full circle. She came into our lives acting like the victim, claiming the world owed her everything, that she was too fragile and broken to stand on her own. And now? She's exactly where she put herself alone, adrift, with no one left to save her from the consequences of her own choices. We learned something too. About strength, about boundaries, about not setting ourselves on fire to keep someone else warm. And about karma, how it comes for everyone eventually, even if it takes longer than you think. If you're out there dealing with someone like Sarah, take this as your sign. You don't owe them your sanity. You don't owe them your life. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. And you don't have to feel guilty when karma does the rest. Because it always does. In the end, Sarah got exactly what she deserved. Watching her lose everything was a reminder that you can keep hurting people forever without the universe catching up. Now, we're stronger, smarter, and done letting toxic people drain us dry. If you've got someone like Sarah in your life, trust me, it's okay to let them go. Don't forget to, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss another story where karma does exactly what it is supposed to do. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is just living your best life while they watch from the sidelines.